And on these, we're not bothering with parchment because it's just mushrooms and the cleanup is almost nothing. And then just going to get the tray fairly full. So just kind of push them down to the one end. Okay, and then cut some more. After cleaning the mushrooms, we cut the bottom of the stem off and then cut them in half. And then with them cut in half, just loading up a bunch of them. That does pretty well. I like that. Okay, yeah, that's really nice. They're thicker than what I had originally planned, but because you've cut them in half, I think they're a great fit for anything we would use them for. These would be great dry, as on salad chunks just like that. These would be great in mushroom soup. These would be great in spaghetti sauce or anything else. Yeah. Okay, I like that. That is really nice. Get that filled, and that'll go into the freezer for pre-freezing. It's a couple days later. We're going to get the mushrooms into the freeze dryer finally. So the freeze dryer has been pre-cooling for an hour or two. I don't really remember. I just start it and then come back later when I think it's cold enough. So the mushrooms are still on the trays, and not all of the 10 pounds fit on the 4 trays. There was a couple more cookie sheets of mushrooms, and those just got taken off of the cookie sheets and put into a Ziploc, and they'll wait until another batch. But it was a good sale. We wanted to get them and get them processed. So now we'll get them weighed and get them in the freeze dryer. Okay, starting with tray 1, 1470. Mushrooms don't have a huge amount of water and mass, so they really, I could probably have just put them on there, not pre-frozen, but I really like to pre-freeze everything, and it does make a difference. Tray 2, 1497. That's pretty good. They weren't weighed, they were just piled on there as they were done. So the fact that they're so similar is pretty impressive. And as I've said many times, thermometers aren't required, but they give me some useful information that speeds up my process, because I don't have to stop the machine and check to find out if there's still cold spots in the middle. 1621. The fact that they're warm does not tell you that they're dry, but the fact that they've never been warm can tell you that they can't be dry yet at the settings that we're using. And finally, 1510. Now I can subtract the tare weight off that and we'll know what the weight of just the mushrooms are. So let's go over and get these in the freeze dryer. Yeah, we'll get all those loaded in there, and this has been pre-cooling now for over 2 hours, and the thermometer on the inside touching the barrel says that it's -40. It says that the rack is already -37, and of course it's going to go up a little bit as we put these in, because these are warmer than the freeze dryer, because these are about 5 degrees, 4 degrees. Looks like they're all about 3 or 4 degrees with the thermometers in there. So that's still 40 degrees warmer, and I can't put my disc in there still because I'm still using the seal off my sister's machine, and its diameter on the inside is slightly smaller. Make another disc to fit this, but I wanted to try that seal because if you remember on the other video, that's the one that I did some repair work to, because it was breaking down on the inside of it where it touches the barrel. The metal of the thinner barrel of hers was actually cutting into it. So I could see spots in there that it was getting damaged. So I wanted to see if putting some silicone on the inside of that would make that work. And it seemed to work very, very well. It seals perfectly. Anyway, we'll be back and check this when it's done. Probably about 2 days, because it's late in the afternoon today. So it won't be done tomorrow probably. It'll probably be done late in the night tomorrow night or early the next morning. But we won't come back until later because I don't work that late, or I don't get up that early. Either way. So we'll see in just a second. Don't go away. It's a couple days later, and this should have been checked a few hours ago, probably 8 hours ago, because it was ready to be checked, but I wasn't here. So I couldn't check it. So I had to restart it to warm it back up because they were down to -40, which means the instant I let the air in by opening the drain valve, the condensation would have been everywhere in there and it would have added moisture to the food. So I never open it when the food is icy cold. I rewarm it so that it's not going to have condensation. Now the lowest temperature is the top one, it's 100 degrees, the bottom's 110, and the middle two are about 120. I'm going to start the dry check, and again, for anybody new, the dry check is where I take it out, weigh it carefully, put it back in, give it 2 or 3 more hours minimum, and see if the weight drops. If the weight drops, it wasn't dry right now. If the weight doesn't drop, then it was dry right now, and I can take it out and bag it in 2 or 3 hours, because there's no way I can tell that it's already dry. You can't tell by touching it. You can't tell just because it's warm. Warm does not equal dry, nor does cold equal wet. It just means it's cold or it's warm. You can still have moisture in it. It's like a bag of rice. Rice is 8 or 10% moisture or higher, can be 14%. Even when you have a bag of nice dry rice, because it's not dry, but it can still be warm. So we'll bypass those last couple of minutes. We'll open the drain valve and get them out. As soon as the pressure is equalized, we'll be able to get them out. Okay. And starting at tray 1, we'll get the weights now. Okay. So now this tray weighs 815 grams, so 815. And people mention sometimes that I still have the thermometer in when I'm doing this weight. It doesn't really matter because this is just a relative weight. I don't really care what it weighs. I'm just writing what the weight is now, so I'll know what it is in 2 or 3 hours to see if it dropped anything. I don't really care what it weighs. We used to just write this on a piece of scratch paper and then at the end of the batch just throw it away, because we just want to know, is it losing weight still or has it finished losing weight? In tray 2, and we're going to rotate the position of the trays like we usually do, because the position, the top space is always a little cooler than the second space. 811, and then we'll rotate those positions, and then the tray 2 I'm going to put up at the top position because it's already had a little more heat than the tray 1. I mean, they're noticeably different in temperature, and the thermometers show it. So I'll put tray 1 down at this warmer spot, and I'm going to switch these two also. So tray 3, 818. And the main reason I use grams and not ounces is because this scale goes to single grams, but it only goes to, I think, tenths of ounces, which would still be 2.2 grams, or 2.8 grams. Okay, tray 4, 814. Okay, now that will go back up. And again, it's noticeably cooler than the tray 4 that was down here is noticeably cooler than the tray 3 spot. You can also see that these have turned brown a little bit, mostly while they were in the freezer. I should try freeze drying these at a lower temperature, or maybe dipping them in some ascorbic acid before I freeze dry them. Okay. So I'm going to restart it with more dry time. Close the drain valve, I did. And the pump is cool, not a problem.
Yeehaw!
And I'm going to put it for and I'm going to put it for 4 hours. So I set the machine for 4 more hours. I'll try to remember to be back here in 2 or 3 hours, but have other things going on today, so I may not make it. I did see that the mushrooms turn slightly brown. It would be interesting to try a couple of experiments. One would be dipping them in some ascorbic acid before I put them in the freezer, because they had started turning brown even before we got them to the freezer, just during the time of processing them. So the other thing I'd like to try, or in conjunction with that perhaps, is try freeze drying them at a lower tray temperature. Instead of using 120 degrees, maybe go down to 110, maybe even 100. They would take longer, but it'd be interesting to see if they look nicer. I'd like to have them stay nice and white during the whole process. We'll be back in a couple hours to recheck them. Okay, so I'm back. Remember I set it for 4 hours and thought I could be back in 2 or 3 hours. It's 7 hours later. Now I'm back to check it finally. It might be 7.5 hours. And we just kept adding time, and once had to restart it because it ran out of time. But had family over, busy doing things, so didn't get to it. It's a lower priority, and it won't hurt it to just sit there and wait for me. So it's probably been dry for a while, but let's get it out and check it. Once again, we'll bypass the rest of the time, open the drain valve and get them out and check them. So starting with tray 1, and it says it's about 128 degrees right now. It's 8:15 dropping down to 8:14, so essentially no change and 7+ hours. Okay, now tray 2, no change. Tray 3, and make sure it's not touching, of course. And no change. And tray 4, and no change. Okay, gonna turn that off. The timer on the machine says a little over 47 hours, but we know from that dry check that it was dry at least 7.5 hours ago. So I'm going to just put 40 hours that it took for those mushrooms. And that's about just a little less than 7 pounds, 6.89 pounds of mushrooms in about 40 hours. And because, as I mentioned when we first started the weight check today, it should have been tested earlier, but I couldn't because I wasn't down here yet. So it was probably even less. And we do have more mushrooms to do another time, so we could perhaps be there on time to check it to find out how long it actually takes. But if I were doing another batch of 7 pounds of mushrooms, I would know that it should be done in less than 40 hours. It gives me a ballpark to look at time-wise to know when to check it. Get the defrost going, and then we can check the power usage. And the power usage is going to be higher than it should be because it's also going to take into account those extra hours. So if you were on a energy budget, it would be a really good thing to be available and ready earlier when it thinks it's done to start checking then. Machine, when it first says it's done, especially without extra drying time, this has 11 hours of extra drying time. Without that, it has never been done when it thinks it's done. With 11 extra hours, it's done maybe 40–50% at the most at the time when it says it's done, including those extra 11 hours. And I should mention, and that's because of the way I fill it. If I were to be more conservative, perhaps only put 5 pounds of food in instead of 10, it might be more accurate. But it's also going to take more total time and more total energy to get it done because I'll have to do 2 batches instead of 1. It will be faster, but it won't be half the time and half the energy to accomplish each batch. So it's still going to be better for me to do it and take 2 days for each batch. Then I only have hands-on time once every 2 days. It's fast and easy that way for me. And the power usage for that one, the way we did it with the extra hours, was 32.89 kilowatt hours. Now, that does take into account those extra hours. So if we could have taken it out on time, it would have probably been at least 5 kilowatt hours less. Okay, now the bagging. We'll get the thermometers out and get the final weights and find out what they weigh now. And then we'll figure out what size bag we're going to use and how much in a bag. Okay, tray 1. I'll finish the math on this and then we'll get labels made. People have mentioned a couple of times or asked why I use the 2 scales. I use this one mostly for weighing the full trays because it only goes down to 1 gram. And for measuring the whole tray, 1 gram increment seems like it's fine enough. This one goes down to 1/10 of a gram. And so I like to use it when I'm bagging so I can get as precise as possible when I'm bagging. And you don't have to use a scale at all for bagging. You can just scoop and use the amount that you want to put in a bag. My sister does a lot of scooping for her bags. The only weighing that really is required in my mind is the dry check weighing. But I like to use this one for bagging so I can get as close as possible. Let's see how much will fit in the bag. So I want to use these quart bags and I want to get an idea of how much will fit in here because I don't think a pound is going to fit in here. And when I talk about bagging and I say a pound, I'm talking about what it weighed before it was dried, not what it weighs now. Oh, I forgot to tear out the scale. Well, let's use another bag. So I need to tear out the scale with a bag on it. Okay, I can get a little bit more than that. So I can get 25 grams in there pretty easily and still, well, not real easily. That's going to be a pretty full bag, but there's no way I'm going to get 37 grams in there. So 25.5 would be 1/10 of this batch. And that's 0.68 of a pound. Well, I think that's what I'm going to do. It's about 2/3 of a pound. 0.666 would be 2/3. So that's the size I'm going to do. I'm going to pour it back out here and get labels. All right, so here's how I'm going to bag this one. So on the mushrooms, they went into the machine on the 7th of May. It took about 40 hours, and again, I know it was a little less than that. The power usage was 32.89, and it would have been less than that. I'm going to bag it in 10 quart bags, and I have the gross weights before it started, including the tray, of course, and then the weights of the tray. Subtract the tray out, and I've got the net weight before I started, which is 3,123 grams, and that's about 6.89 pounds. And then the dry check, and again, this has no value except for checking to make sure it stopped losing weight. So I have that I did a dry check of 7+ hours this time. So I've got that information. So for instance, if it had dropped 1 gram per each tray, but it was over 7 hours, and I knew that that food was acceptable to do that, then I could still note that in case in the future I have a problem with that batch, I'll know what happened to it. So it had a total water loss of 2,868 grams, or about 416.25 grams per pound. Okay, then I've got the gross weights afterwards, and then the net weights afterwards. So the total of all of this is only 255 grams right now, which is about just a little over a ½ pound is all. And that works out to 37 grams per pound. But we're going to bag these in about 2/3 of a pound. So we're going to divide the total by 10 basically and just put that in there. So 25.5 grams in each bag, which is about 2/3 of a pound. It's 0.68, so it's close enough. So and then to get it back to the same water level as they were, I need to add 287 grams per bag. So So I'll put that on the label that it was about 2/3 of a pound before, and I might put the grams on there also, and that it needs that amount of water to get it back. Now for most things, including mushrooms, you can just soak them in water, they'll absorb what they need. But if I'm putting this in a dish, I'll want to know how much water to add to it so that I don't overwater it. And simply rehydrating it by putting it in a lot of water and then draining it, well, I'm going to be losing some of the flavor and some of the nutrients, so I don't like to do that if I don't need to. We've often done that with corn and peas and carrots and things like that, but we still try to keep the water to a minimum so we're not washing away too much of it. And if I'm putting it in things, I don't want to do that at all. I just want to add, like a stew, for instance, I just want to add the amount of water that these need to that stew and then add these dry. That way all of the flavor and nutrients end up in that stew. But you could just float them and then drain them. So let's get some labels and I'll be right back. I've got my bags labeled, so I've got the batch number written in felt pen at the top, and then I've got all the information about this batch on the label. So I have the batch number, the date that it went into the freeze dryer, what it is, what it weighed before it was freeze dried, how much water it needs to get it back to that, and then some idea of how to use it. And we'll tear out the scale so it's not weighing the bag. Oh, and I should remember, this is the scoop that, it was a little bit wider scoop, and I cut the ends off and made new ends for it. And I have a video where I made one that didn't require any cutting or making new ends, and I just heated it up and then pushed it into the tray with a block of wood. So anyway, that worked even better, and that was for my sisters. Anyway, so yeah, the scoop did not come fitting the trays like this. It was actually too wide, and I bent hers up and I cut mine off. So 25.5 grams each is what we're after. Oh, really close the first try. All right, 25.4, that's close enough. If I can be within a couple of tenths of a gram, I'm usually pretty happy about that. So that's fairly full, but it's going to close and not be too tight and crush everything right away. And mushrooms were one of the things that aren't going to leave any real residue, so the cleaning's very quick and easy. And I know I've mentioned a few times, but it's probably worth repeating, that I wash the table often, so that way when I do inevitably spill stuff on it, it's still good to use. Okay, they're all within 2/10 of a gram. So, and as usual, I'm going to use the 300 cc oxygen absorbers in these. And with these, they are really full of air. So you could probably use a little bit smaller oxygen absorber in these, but I'm going to stick with these because I know that these will do the job and do the job for a very long time. In fact, I could show a quick piece. This is the one that was in there since, let's see, January 27th. And then we had opened it 2 more times. So it had 3 full amounts of air put in there. Each time it was absorbing 215 cc's of oxygen. The sensors are beautiful pink still, which means it took care of the oxygen 3 times. That's 645 cc's of oxygen absorbed by that 300 cc oxygen absorber. So they definitely do a good job. And that's part of why we test them more than once when we get a batch of them, to make sure that they keep doing well. We've never had one fail, but it's nice for peace of mind and for me to make sure that they keep working. And then this is the one that we did in the soda container. and you can see its little absorber indicators, the oxygen indicators. And this has been in here since February 6th, and this is a 2-liter bottle, which would mean it's over 430 cc's of oxygen, and that's a 300 cc oxygen absorber. So it did its job, and it's continuing to do that. And then the other 2 experiments that we did, this is the freezer quart Ziploc. It's a different kind of plastic. It never did get pink on those. So there's still plenty of oxygen in there. The oxygen went right through the bag. It never could take care of it. On the Seal-A-Meal type bag, it did it part way. They're slightly pinkish. The bag did get a bit smaller, but the oxygen absorber apparently ran out of capacity before it could keep it oxygen free in here. Because again, this kind of plastic is not made for this job. These do great for freezers. We've used this for steak and green beans and stuff for years in the freezer, and they do real well. But they're not made for this job. And they're transparent, which means you'd have to keep them in the dark to protect the food from light also. But anyway, they just didn't do the job. We'll get oxygen absorbers in these and then get them sealed. And very rapidly, when you open that package, the sensor turns the dark blue color. Okay, I'm going to tuck these down the side because they're pretty full, and I don't want this to end up in the zipper or seal area. And then I like to pull them aside a little bit so I don't forget which ones I've already done. Because that's happened more than once, and I have to figure out which one's missing one. And I'm going to just pull the 2 ends of it. And with these, I'm not going to try to press out the extra air because it's pretty full already. And if there is a space, I'll kind of squish out the air. And if you could vacuum them, you could vacuum them also if you wanted to. It is going to crush the mushrooms, but then the oxygen absorber will have less to do, and that's a good thing. That means it will be, you could use a smaller size one, or you just know that there's extra capacity for that oxygen absorber later. Okay, now get these sealed. Trying to seal it as high up on the top as I can to give myself room to do it again if something goes wrong. Got it sealed very high up on the bag. Got room for 2 or 3 more tries if I've messed that up. And I could also cut it close to that seal and still have enough room for at least 1 more time, maybe 2, before it gets to the tear-off strip. So usually if we're at home, we use scissors and cut it off very high so that we can reseal it if we want to. And then after it finishes, I like to give it a couple of seconds to cool just a bit before I release it. And then I'm checking to make sure that I do have all of the seal on the bag. So if I try to get too high and get a little bit of an angle, I might go off the edge and not have 100% of it. And usually I have it slightly angled. This side's a little lower, and that's just because I can't seem to keep it exactly straight. And of course, once in a while, check to make sure, I mean, not necessarily more than once in every batch, but every so often check to make sure that your sealer actually functions. We keep extra pieces of this around just for testing. Yeehaw! And one last thing that we like to do is add the total gross weight of the bag and write that on the bag, so if it has a problem later, it'll start to get heavier and we will know right away. And if it bounces between 2 numbers, I like to take the higher number. So anyway, this is 52 grams, and I'll write 52 grams on the corner of it, so I will know that I can put it on a scale later, and if it weighs 53, 54 grams, then I'll know that it's having a problem. And this is probably one of the places that a better, more sensitive scale might be useful. And they should all be really close on these because we measured them out. So basically on these, the bag and the oxygen absorber weighs approximately the same as the mushrooms in there. So half of this weight isn't even the food. Now those are ready for storing on the shelf. When we store these on the shelf, we'll add the bin number and we'll add that to the database so we'll know where to find them when it comes time to use them. Stay tuned to the next one. I have no idea what it's going to be. Most of my focus lately has been working on the minivan to make it into a van for camping and taking some of this stuff with us for use out on the road. So if you're interested in that, come join us on, I'm putting most of those on the other channel unless enough people on this channel say they'd like to see it on this channel, and then I'll put them here too. Let me know what you think and which way you'd like to see it, if you'd like to see it, or if you're interested at all. Thanks for watching and stay tuned to the next one.